Thank you very much, the faculty of IMT, for forgiving some of those rather silly things that one did while one was there. And one is extremely happy to receive this award on behalf of all my peers at IMT. We had a wonderful batch of peers. I learned a lot from them. We had wonderful faculty, Professor Santosh Sood. He literally changed my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no idea where I was going. And for the first time, when I heard him speak in the brand management class, actually just about 6 months before I was getting out, I had this moment where I knew what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I owe it to that person and owe it to IMT for showing me the way. I'd like to thank my wife, Dr. Ganga Amritesh, again for putting up for so many years. I'm sometimes surprised why she didn't poison me in my sleep sometime, considering all the difficulties that I've created for her. So I think she's the most important person in my life, and without her, nothing would have been possible. So thank you very much. So, one of the things in the email that I received from Amit, which caught my attention, and I immediately replied saying, yes, I will come and speak here, is I've spoken to various kinds of audiences, but I've never actually spoken to a group of people who are in the education, I don't want to use the word industry, I'd say profession. My father was a professor. He was a professor at the Indian Institute of Science, and he taught there for, I think, 35 years, and he guided a lot of PhD students, and he taught one course for 30 years there, the Power Electronics course. And I've lived on the campus, and I've always been sort of highly influenced by his values and the way he, looked at the world. So I was extremely, nervous when I said that, when I was told that the group is going to be people who are professors and teachers in the management domain. So with some humility and a lot of trepidation, I stand in front of you trying to talk about what my thoughts on what it needs to succeed, especially in context of consumer business in today's world. And sort of try to contextualize that for young students, and I think some of the values that they need to think about. It's a good thing that the award was given before my speech, because now I don't think they can take it back. But there have been times when I have spoken before getting the award and run the risk of not getting the award itself. So pardon me if some of what I say is controversial, and pardon me if some of what I say is it's not going to be offensive, but pardon me if something is going to be very different from what the currently held belief is. Just understand that I'm not talking about you, but somebody else, whenever you get that feeling, right? So I'll start off by first talking about the fact that, over the last 15, 20 years, especially in the world of consumer business, the world has changed, right? And I don't know if enough is being talked about that changed in business schools today. When I speak to young management trainees who join our organization from various institutes around the country, I get a sense that the full import and full impact of that change is not fully understood by them. I don't know if it's they who don't understand, or I don't know if it's our ecosystem that creates them to a situation where they don't fully get it. But I see a clear disconnect between what's happening or the requirement of leadership in consumer business and some of the talent that we see. And of course, once in a while you see a person who is very different and a bright spark. But I'm talking about majority of the times, one looks at people only as potential. Do they have a mind which is open for curating, as opposed to a mind that's ready to come and lead us? So, talking a little bit about that change, I think the biggest change is this statement. This is, how can consumers know what they want when they haven't even seen it before, right? And all of you know who made this statement, Steve Jobs, and he made products with a very different philosophy. He made products, and several products after that Apple has made with a different philosophy, and many other companies who are like that now, without really understanding from consumers if that product meets some unmet need. But consistently, they've created products, and many other examples of companies that are successful today have created successful products which are game-changing, surprising, and unexpected. And consumers didn't tell them about that. So the other statement which is important is, consumers have a nagging habit of saying one thing, but doing something completely different. Now, when you put something in italics and put it in quotes, it sounds like somebody very important has said it, but I just said it, okay? But it's true. I mean, I believe in it from my own experience. I used to work in a company, I used to work for Whirlpool. I was actually the product manager there on the refrigeration business. And like most left-brain American companies, Whirlpool also had this robust research mechanism where we would get scores from the research team down to the second decimal, so we could obsess about a 4.43 versus a 4.39 and argue whether that's statistically different enough for us to making a decision on a feature or on a product. And then we would always create products which consumers said they wanted. As a matter of fact, we would spend a lot of time asking them, what do you want? Tarbooj rakhna hai, ki 2 liter ka pani rakhna hai, ki, those kind of conversations, and we would come back feeling that we have learned a lot from them. And we would launch a product which was exactly what they wanted, but then they went and bought something else, which didn't have any of those features, which just had something else which nobody talked about before. And I used to feel so frustrated as a product manager, and I felt like calling up those panels and asking them, why didn't you tell me? Even a lady whom we had researched bought a fridge which was completely the opposite of what she told us. So this is my personal experience. So if you put both these statements together, it's a very staggering problem. One is that most successful people seem to be saying, unless they see my product, how can they say whether they like it or not? Okay, and the other is, when you ask them what they say, okay, that's not from Steve Jobs' experience, from mine, but when you ask them what they want, they tell you something else and they buy something else, right? So it's a really big problem. And we discussed it also deeply, me and Steve Jobs, and we had this consensus that, yeah, we must find some sort of, answer to this question, right? And that's the question I pose in front of all of you as well, that if you believe in these two fundamental questions, and if you find that there's an element of truth to it, then a lot of the pedagogy and the teaching that at least I went through, I don't know what's being taught today, sort of help build a theory or a narrative which was exactly the opposite of these two truths that I have come to believe are truths now. So there needs to be a larger discussion, I think, around this, and whenever there's a problem that sounds like exactly opposite of what we've known, I think the solution is also very elegant. And I think B schools that can provide those elegant solutions and that can, break away from this situation, I think will be the ones. I think the professor before was talking about having a vision, and he was talking about having a niche and a sort of difference. I think there is an opportunity in the Indian environment for B schools to take that leadership and have a specificity in their education program that can be very different from what the popular narrative seems to be. I think the biggest issue with most people in the Indian business environment, I'm not just talking about people who have come out of B school, but I think most managers, even in jobs where they're supposed to create, where they're supposed to produce, and where they're supposed to show thought leadership, is the word called reductionism. And reductionism is not a bad word, but reductionism is about reducing a complex problem into small parts that we can easily understand, right? And it's a very useful way of problem solving, because sometimes problems are so complex that they seem like impossible to even grapple with, so we need to break them down into small parts. The problem is, when we apply reductionism to everything, we miss the big picture. We miss the larger evolution or the larger movement that's happening in culture, and we see something else. So if you think about love, what do people think of love, right? They don't really think, right? They feel it, they know what it is intuitively, they can't put words to it. But there is a sort of shared understanding that most people will have of what the word love means. But if you were to ask a B school student to demystify it, or explain it, they'll probably reduce it to something like that, something that will make each part will seem to make sense, but when the whole comes together, it's almost meaningless. Think of this problem in a business context, right? You'd go to a group of consumers and break them down to small pieces and try to, put meaning to each of them. What's even better, size it. What's even better, understand motivations of each of them. What's even better, understand the unmet needs of each of them. And then say, hey, there's a great opportunity which you can address because nobody seems to be addressing it. Go after that group and do a need scope, kind of money that TNS charges. I hope this video doesn't reach TNS. The type of money they charge for need scope is huge, and lots of B-School research students come and pay that money. But after doing all of that and arriving at this golden opportunity, somebody comes and does something which changes the whole game. That segment doesn't exist anymore. That need scope is not relevant anymore. It just changes in one moment. And we keep getting caught again and again and again and again. And especially Indian managers keep getting caught again and again and again and again. Right? So, I think the theory that great ideas can be born from seeing the world through a new lens, not through a lens of what is, which is what I think most of our education is about, which is what I think whole of the first year education of B-School is about, focusing a lot on what the world is and very little, and I'm not saying that's not important, I think that has a role as well, so please take whatever I'm saying in some sort of context. But I think very little focus on what might be. And a lot of focus on what is and very little focus on what might be, right? So in my opinion, I think this is not going to be enough going forward, and it's already not been enough for the last 20 years, but it'll be more and more stark, especially in consumer business, and more in consumer business. Obsession with the current marketplace without having an imagination of the future. What is the food service business going to look like 10 years from now? What is the chocolate industry going to look like from 10 years from now? And what might drive those shifts? Not having a view on that, not having a theory, however wrong or right it might be, but not having that theory and obsessing with what the current market, I think it's not going to be enough. The question we need to ask is, do we teach that? Do we have a conversation around that or not? If we do, it's great. If we don't, then probably there's an opportunity for us to start doing that. Having a narrow category lens and looking what's inside the box, unmet needs, segmentation, I already talked about that. I think it's not going to be enough at all going forward. And mapping consumption, and this is really in my industry, in retail, this is a very important thing for most marketing people, is to not study consumers, but to study consumption occasions, right? Because the logic is, and theory is that in a particular occasion of consumption, all people, irrespective of who they are, will behave in a similar fashion, right? And this was sort of seen as the new thing. But again, we've seen time and again when somebody maps human life motivations, consumption changes dramatically. So all study of consumption also results in a similar kind of situation when somebody makes a dramatic move. So this is a problem, and we must acknowledge this problem. Okay, and I think there's a need to move from formula to imagination. There is overemphasis, as it is the Indian mind is an engineer's mind. As it is almost everybody who comes to a B-School is an engineer, or at least 70% of them are engineers, right? So as it is, they're already taught to think from a very structured, formulaic approach where logic trumps over anything else, right? And especially if you go into an IIT and then you go to a business school where there are 70% people from IIT, then the chances are already that, you are coded to be that kind of a person. So I think that's great as well. Please don't think that I'm saying that that doesn't have value. That has great value, but what if we could overlay on top of that fantastic Indianness this layer of imagination? Can we teach how to imagine? Can we teach people how to provide solutions? Is, I think, the big invitation. And I think the answer lies to this in this statement. This is, it's not a quote by anyone. This is, I think it's a fact. We need to fully research it, and probably somebody needs to, collaborate with me and write a paper on this. But by and large, while great companies have been built by organizations, great organizations have built by a group of people. In the last 50 years, if you look at the mega brands, or actually even 100 years, if you look at the mega brands that have been built, those that have attracted maximum consumer love, and those that have been most disruptive, right, are not built by marketing organizations, are actually built by an individual. Later on, it might get acquired by a large corporation. Later on, somebody with financial muscle who sees it as an interesting opportunity might acquire it and make it even larger. But almost all of them, I haven't found a single exception till now, but there might be a few. Almost all of them have been built by individuals, and most of them did not go to business schools. Forget going to an Indian business school. They didn't even go to Sloan Institute of Management, right? So, a little bit of thinking around what is the process that happens for something great to be created. And it's interesting to think a little bit about values, right? What do those individuals have which differentiate them from somebody else? It goes back to some fundamental value that they had in almost all of these cases. I don't have enough time, but I could have talked about 5-6 examples to narrow down on each of them eventually leading up to a value. What is a value? A value is something that helps us decide between right and wrong. In a business context, value often helps us decide between two rights, because a right and wrong question is mostly very clear. But it helps us decide between two rights. In the previous wonderful, inspiring speech that we heard, also we heard about how inspiring value can be to somebody in almost answering their why they exist, what their purpose is. So it often boils down to values of that individual. And if you think about it, values drive our behavior, because values help us decide between right and wrong. Therefore, in business context, values help us decide between two rights. And we all know that consistently behaving in one way or in one direction typically builds something. And in our context, it means building a business or building a brand. So if you put it all together, values drive behavior and behavior drives business. And all of them had that one wonderful value which was so important for that eventual business to be created, which nobody knew, and they just stayed true to that value. And they were so idiotic, and they were so obsessive, and they were so difficult, and they were so difficult to comprehend, and they were such a pain in everyone's butt, because others didn't have that value. Others did not decide their behavior by that value, but those guys did. And therefore, they created these wonderful or differentiated or special brands that got created. So where does that put us? Does it put all of us in a situation where we are preparing managers to go and take care of this already great business that we have prepared? Are we preparing only maintenance staff? Are we creating only glorified accountants and engineers to help those great ideas that come from some other people who never went to these B schools, to help support them to scale it up? Is that the limited role of the B school? If yes, then so be it. And well described, and there's a great way to do that, right? And then we should not confuse ourselves with the fact that we can create great brands, we can inspire people to create great organizations. Then our role is sharply defined. But if not, then we need to find a way to help people be great and not help people be great managers. The moment we put the word, we are creating managers, and in IMT we used to say business managers, I think should change that. I hope you already changed it. Because if we are going to create managers, then managers will put their values aside. And managers will manage the leadership demonstrated by somebody else. So that's a choice we need to make, I think. So for example, I think the important questions will be, this is not fully thought through because some of this is written in your context. Can we teach how to imagine? I don't even know how you can teach somebody to imagine, but it's a good question to ask to somebody who's thinking about academics in this business context. Is there a way to teach somebody how to imagine? Is there a way to teach somebody how to lead? Is there a way to teach somebody how to dream? I had a point there, but I took it off because I thought you might not like it, but I just say it nevertheless. Can we teach somebody how to waste time productively? Right? Because I find wasting time and not doing anything is sometimes the most productive time when people actually do something. So can we teach them that? Can we teach them not to always ask, but to see and to learn from what they see? Can we teach them how to not immediately reduce? We always have this need, no? When we hear something we don't fully understand or a phenomenon that we can't comprehend, we feel very uncomfortable if we can't reduce it to some small thing we can understand. We eventually want to with a concept that we can't grasp. So can we teach them not to do that, please? And let it be next morning so that they can solve it at some other point of time and have a great, brilliant idea? Can we teach that? I don't know, but it's a good question to ask. So can we celebrate that not knowing and letting it be? Because, and reduce this left brain engineering urge to know it all. And that's what I think the ills of most of the young people who come and join these consumer organizations is that we spend a lot of time just pulling them out of this mindset. So why do we have to make them unlearn is the question. Why can't they already be more attuned to what the requirement of today's business environment is? It's a golden triangulation, in my opinion, where game-changing ideas come, starting from values, but great changing ideas come from, first of all, understanding what's emergent in the category. I already talked about it before, not seeing the world as it is, but seeing it more from the lens of what it can be. So can we teach them a little bit more about how to find out what's emergent, what tools we need to have, what tools are we teaching kids today in school to help them form a view of what's emergent? Are we teaching that at all? I hope you are. Are we teaching them how to read culture? Yes, we are teaching them how to do consumer research and segmentation and positioning and targeting, which is a Western theory of management, sorry to say. But are we teaching them how to understand what emergent popular culture is? India, China, and rest of the world, right? That's the largest segmentation of the world, isn't it? India, China, and rest of the world, or maybe one more segment. And why is it so? Because our culture is so powerful and so deep and so different, and any shifts in that culture can completely change everything. Any shift in our popular culture can completely make irrelevant all positioning strategies that we have. If the popular culture of India is about consumption, as it was between the early 90s and till maybe about 5 years ago, if it was about consumption, then not playing to an identity production through consumption would not have given you a business. And today, if it is about dealing with the repercussions of that consumption, playing the game on consumption is not going to build. So it's such a simple thing at one level, right? But do we have this conversation in the business class is a good question to ask. And of course, values and consumer motivations and what the natural, I think the third part we do a very good job of. So in my opinion, this is just my view, please reject it. But in my opinion, I think without a solid understanding of each of these three sort of pillars, I don't think an idea can be built, and I don't think somebody can propose a solution, right? And everyone must have some view of this, especially those who want to be in consumer business and create products and create solutions which are inspiring and new and game-changing. So I think, in my opinion, if I was to start a B school, I would not have case studies in my B school. Right? I would move away from case studies. And I would definitely move away from Western case studies. I would definitely move away from those case studies, and I would definitely move away from any case study which is more than 10 years old. Because in the last 10 years, the world has completely changed. You don't need 4 Ps now, you need an app. You don't need 4 Ps now, you just need an app to create a disruption, right? So any case study which is more than 10 years old, I would say in my B school, should be torn and thrown away. Between 9 to 7 years old, I would look at it with a deep degree of suspicion, okay? And maybe 1 or 2 years old. But maybe life study. Do we teach empathy? Because without empathy, we can't observe or we can't learn anything, in my opinion. Do we teach leadership skills? In the previous speech, I think we heard some very good tips on leadership skills. Do we teach that? Do we teach people about values and how values lead to eventually business so that they can discover what their inner value is and what their core value is? Do we inspire people to have lived and felt experiences? Or do we teach them quantitative research and statistical significance only, which is not lived and definitely not felt, only seen? Do we teach life wiring of business and marketing, or do we teach only category, motivation, and consumption? Do we teach semiotics? Semiotics is the study of symbols and visuals and metaphors that help us demystify deepest meaning that consumers can't articulate. Some of the largest changes in the world have been driven by a deep understanding of meaning systems that somebody was able to decode. Right? Maybe they didn't study semiotics, maybe they just had it. But can we teach semiotics? Can we teach anthropology? Do we teach anthropology in our schools? If we don't, we should, I think. Because if we teach them all of these things, they will have a point of view, their own point of view, however wrong or ridiculous it might be, on resident, dominant, and emerging narratives in culture, in their category, and in their country. What is the resident culture? What is the resident culture that still makes people in Gujarat have 95% vegetarians and 5% non-vegetarians? Why is it still so? If everything has changed, why has that not changed? What is holding that back? You must understand that, no? If you don't understand that, how can you create a solution for Gujarat? What is the dominant idea of consumption? Why is Karan Johar not relevant today, and why is somebody else relevant today? They should have a theory to explain that, no? If they don't have a theory to explain that, how can they build a product that can become mass? They can't, no? They'll only create something which is very small. And what is the emergent narrative? What is going to happen tomorrow? Why suddenly kids who are 18 years old are asking their parents, is it okay to be lesbian? What has happened that they can be vegetarian at the, they value being vegetarian, right, which is in some ways very residual, but are okay with asking their father if it's all right to be a lesbian. How can they do both these things at the same time? No, if they're asking a question about lesbianism, they should be smoking and drinking and eating non-veg and pork and beef, no? No, they're not doing that. They are residing in these three states of mind and being at the same time. No. So are we teaching them, or are we having this conversation where they can sort of have a point of view and participate in a conversation around that? I doubt it. I doubt it. Therefore, I think my request to you is to not listen to an answer that says, no, play to the market, it's okay. No, don't. That's not I don't agree with that answer. Right? I would urge you to say, how can I create my product which is different? How can I have an ideology which is different for the Indian market? Right? And sure, I mean, you can get it completely wrong and the business school can close down or whatever. But at least you have a shot at creating a, Sloan School of Management here, and I think we can do the other way around. Switch off the video conferencing, no? We can do it from here. So in summation, I think this administration, I think it's MBA is administration, no? Am I right? It's a wrong word, I think, administration. We should not look at it as we are making people to do administration, a job of administration, right? I think understanding meaning in what drives things as opposed to, knowing what drives things. What is the deepest reason behind something to happen? I think privileging that and encouraging that is the better aim for me, and not about observing behavior and then trying to say, oh, people are behaving like this, so let me do something about it. But displaying the leadership to change behavior. To have a point of view and say, oh, people will do this, yeah. Why will they do it? No, because I feel it, because this gut feel thing, it's not correct. But because we have taught them, because they have a point of view on culture, because they have a point of view of what's emergent in the category, because they have a point of view of what the natural area for the brand is, they will be able to articulate what will change behavior. And the last point is articulation of that leadership position. So if we can teach them how to understand meaning, how to change behavior, and how to be bold and courageous to articulate, then I think we will produce a new kind of MBA from India, and which will be very different from the Western idea of management education, which will be relevant for this country, because I think India is going to show the way. on the new type of consumption, because we can't consume endlessly and expect this world to exist. So I think we have this opportunity in front of us. You have this opportunity in front of you, and I'm envious of the job that you guys do. And I wish all of you all the best in building this fantastic management education system that you are doing in India. And we are also thankful to you for helping us have these careers that we today have, and for your role in our lives. Thank you very much. Okay.